Hi, today we will talk about the Bible feature of Holyrics. So you might have noticed in the previous videos this big top left hand side button here saying Go to Bible. And if you click it, you will notice that Holyrics completely changes itself. It becomes almost like a new software. But on the left hand side here, we can recognize a list of verses. And the right hand side here, we have somewhat like a periodic table of the books of the Bible. The colors represent the different sections of the Bible. For example, the first five books written by Moses. These ones are the prophets, the Gospels, the letters, Revelations, the poetic books, and so on. On the bottom here, the left-hand side shows the chapters of the book you have selected, and on the left-hand side, the verses of each chapter. So to select a book, a chapter, and a verse, you simply have to click on the book on the top, the chapter on the bottom left, and the verse on the bottom right. As I click different verses here, you can notice that on the left-hand side here, the verses also get updated. And that also occurs in here if you select the verse through this left-hand side list. So this list always shows the verses of the chapters that you have selected. Another handy way to select a verse that you want to present is to simply start typing the name of the chapter in whenever you are in this interface of Holyrics. So for example, if I press J, it will bring me this window which shows me all the books that starts with J and also their abbreviations. So I can either type the full name of the book or their abbreviations. So if I keep typing, for example, O, it updates again to show only the books with J and O. And although there are a lot, there's only one with J, O, and B. So as soon as I press B now, it will automatically detect that I want to select the book of Job. So if I press, so now I can select the chapter, and you see here on the bottom that it tells me how many chapters this book has. So I can select, for example, chapter 10. And now it brings me to the verse. And it also shows me how many verses there are. So if I press 1, it expects some second digit because I might be referencing verse 10 or 12, 15. It doesn't know. So it does expect a second digit. Same occurs if I press 2 because I might be referenced to verse 20, 21, or 22. But as soon as I press 3, since there are no verse 30, it will automatically select verse 3 for me because that's the only verse that starts with the digit 3. So as soon as I press 3, it selects Job chapter 10 verse 3 for me. Now if I go back, press Job 10, if I want to select the verse 2, for example, if I press 2 once, it does expect a second digit, but if I want the second verse, I can type 02 and then it will select verse 2 for me. So this is, if you're experienced with Holyrics, you can select verses pretty quickly using this quick search feature. So for example, if I want John 3:16, I can simply use that feature, and now I'm in John 3:16. So to start a presentation, we can click on this play button, which says show verse, and there's a shortcut for it, which is enter and also F5, whatever you are most comfortable with. But you can also double click the verse here on this list, and you see that it starts the presentation. Notice that the theme that it's using is this one right on the bottom here. You can change it for any theme that you have created in Holyrics. You see my custom theme, which we created in this series of videos. And although there's no way to create a theme in this interface, whatever theme you have created in the usual Holyrics interface will show up here. So if you want to know more about creating themes, I advise you to see the previous videos that we made in this series. When you are presenting a verse, you can press your left arrow in your keyboard and you will go to the previous verse, and you see that's automatically updating in the presentation. And to go to the next verse, you can simply press the right key and it updates the verse to the next one. And you can also see the verses changing in this right hand side here of the verses. That won't occur though if you have a different chapter selected. So for example, I am now presenting John 3:18. If I select chapter 2, Notice that nothing changes in the presentation. And if I keep pressing the right key, you see that the presentation keeps showing the next verse from whatever I am presenting now. This is handy if you want to keep presenting a verse while search for another verse. So I might go to John 2, which might be the next verse that the preacher is going to read. So while he's still reading John 3:18, I might be ready to show John 2 verse 1. But notice that when I'm not with the chapter selected, it won't update here. I won't know through this visual interface which verse is selected. The only way to know what verse I'm showing is to look at the presentation. So going back to John 3:15, which shows here that it's being presented right now. You see here on the bottom that I can present one verse at a time. If I click this 2, you see that it's now presenting 2 verses, and I can change this maybe 19 and 20. I'm gonna double click to update it on the presentation. And I can keep doing this for 3 verses if I want to present 3 verses at a time. Or I can come here and put however many verses I want to present at once if I'm not satisfied with 1, 2, or 3. You can see here on the top of the verses list that we have 3 different tabs, which right now have the same names, KJV, which stands for the King James Version of the Bible. In theory, this should be different versions of the Bible, so you can compare, or maybe your preacher is going to read a specific version and you can quickly switch between them. But unfortunately, right now, English version of Holyrics only have the KJV, I would say, the King James Version of the Bible available. And you can see here, if you click on this arrow here, you will see that all of the other versions available are in Portuguese. So there's no other English version available yet due to copyright reasons, but we are working on it. If there were other versions, you would see them here on this list, but there is a possibility that they wouldn't be on this list because you wouldn't have downloaded them onto your Holyrics. So in the case there are other versions, you could come to the version and then download. And in here you would see all the other versions that would be available but not installed on your Holyrics, and you could simply click on this button to install them. So right now you see there are other languages but not other versions of the English Bible. We recommend you to keep looking on this window, and hopefully in the future there will be more English versions that you can simply click to download and you will be able to have them in here. In case there were different versions and you wanted to, maybe your preacher is going to read a specific version, let's suppose it's the second version here. If I want to switch them to my main version, which is represented by this Bible icon here, I simply click on this check mark which says make primary, and this, whatever it would be here, would go to your primary version of the Bible. Right here on the bottom left side of this list part of the interface, you see that there's an add to favorite button, and you can also see a favorites right here on the top of the periodic table. So for example, I can make a verse my favorite by clicking on this button. In the shortcut, it's Alt Enter. And you see that it shows up here, which is easy to select. And then I can go maybe to another verse in the other end of the Bible, make that my favorite as well, and then keep doing that and add them to my favorites. So maybe your preacher is going to read more than one verse in different books, and they might be very far apart, which might not give you time to search them manually every time he starts to read that verse. So you can simply favorite them on the top here and then just click on them and it will be selected. And as soon as you double click or press enter or F5, it will be displayed on the presentation. So that's pretty easy. Also, if you have any verses that are used very often, you can put them here. As soon as you don't want them or don't need them anymore, you can delete individual ones or delete all of them at once. And you can see that on the right of the favorites, there is a history button, and you can see all the verses that you have presented on this session of Holyrics. And again, if you don't want that, you can simply remove one or remove all of them. Both of these lists, they are temporary. They delete themselves once you close Holyric. So the next time you open Holyrics, both of these lists will be erased. To the right hand side of this heart icon, there is the search icon, in which you can search for, let me stop this presentation, in which you can search for specific verses of the Bible. And the way that the search works is based on the exact phrase that you type or based on the individual words that you type. So for example, if I type Jesus said and I mark the exact phrase, notice that you can either mark the exact phrase or work with these three options here. Once you mark that, the other three get grayed out, so you cannot click them. But as soon as I mark search for Jesus said using the exact phrase, it will find me all the verses that has the words Jesus said exactly as I wrote, not including capitalization, but in terms of the words that I put in here. So it only finds the verses that has Jesus first and then said right after it. And then here I can filter based on only Old Testament, which obviously there's none. New Testament, if I want to search on only one specific book, I can also use that. And if you had more than one version here, you could also search in only one of the versions of all of the versions and so on. So if I don't mark the exact phrase and I keep all of the words marked and search again, you see that now it finds all the verses that has the word Jesus and the word said in the same verse, but not necessarily as I wrote one after the other. So you see that it finds the one that has the one after the other, but not all of them are like this. The other option is any word. So now it will give me all the verses that has Jesus or the word said. So if the verse doesn't have the word said, but it has the word Jesus, it will find me that as well. And if it doesn't have the word Jesus, but it has the word said, it will also find me that. So if I search, you see here that now there's a lot of verses that only has the word said. And if I go into the New Testament, there's probably a lot of verses that only has the word Jesus. So you can play with those to find the verse that you are looking for. Once you found the verse, you can simply click on them here, double click to select them on your Holyrics Bible interface. And then to start a presentation, you can simply press enter or double click or press F5. So the next button in this interface is the custom automatic presentation. Once you click it, you will see this window with all the books, all the chapters, and all the verses in that chapter. So if you want to do a automatic presentation, you can select the verses that you want, and you can select more than one pressing the shift keys. And once you select the verses that you want, you can send them to this playlist on the right. And it can be different books and different chapters as well. You can even rearrange the way that they are going to be presented here, the way you want. And once you are satisfied with it, you can come here to the bottom, select which theme it will be presented with. You can select if it's an automatic slideshow or not. If you don't select that, you will still have to press the right arrow key and the left arrow key to switch between verses. But if you don't want that, you can select the automatic, select how many seconds you want between each verse, and if you want them to repeat or not. So once you have that, if you simply press show, you'll see here on the top that it will cycle through all the verses that I selected, and once that finishes, it will simply finish the presentation. There you go. So that's the automatic presentation. The next button is the report error, and it works on a verse-to-verse basis. You can select a verse and click on that button, and if you notice a mistake on how the verse is written, you can simply suggest an edit to it and send it to us, and it will analyze and update the entire database of Holyrics, so it will be updated for everyone that uses that Bible version in Holyrics. The last button here is the responsive reading, and this is useful if your church has the habit of having your pastor reading one verse and having the church reading the other verse. So you can use this responsive reading if you want that. So if you click on this button, you will be prompted to select what verses you want to work on this way. And you will also start in whatever you have selected in the interface of Holyrics. So let's say I want from Matthew 1:16 to 1:22, and then I press OK. And you see here that it starts with the first verse, Matthew 1:16, and then it says leader here on this heading. So this first verse is supposed to be read by the leader, and if I press the right arrow key on my keyboard, I'll see that the next verse is going to be read by the church, and if I keep pressing, keeps alternating between the leader and the church until I reach my last verse, which is 22nd, which is the leader. And then if I keep trying to press my right arrow key, you see that I'm pressing it right now, and Holyrics is not allowing me to go to the verse 23 because I only select up to the verse 22 when I started my responsive reading. So it won't allow you to go out of those verses that you selected. If you want to change this leader and church headings here, what you can do is you can come to the settings, and in this responsive reading tab, you can change whatever is going to be shown for the first description, so our leader. So if you want to change maybe that to maybe preacher or maybe pastor, or if you want to put the name of your pastor, you can put maybe Matt and keep this as a church or congregation or something like this. And when we do that, you can see here on the top that now the leader is Matt and we have the church as the other description. Another thing we can do here, we can show the two verses at once instead of having one in each slide, let's say. So as soon as we press OK, you see that now we have two verses at once. Another thing we can do is we can change the font color of the description, meaning this heading here. Right now the default is black, but if we do that, we see that that's not a good idea for the theme that we are using. But you can change that if you want. You can also change if it's going to be underlined or not, and if it's going to be using the theme effects that you defined when you created the theme or not. Lastly, you can also change the description of the last verse. Sometimes the last verse is supposed to be read by everybody, or you can change that at all, but if you select that, you will see that now the last verse, with this Matthew 1:22, it's changed. Instead of Matt that was here before, now it's also everybody should read that, and you can change that if you want a different thing to occur in the last verse. So this is how you configure the responsive reading. So let's get out of the responsive reading and talk about some general configuration here for the way that the verse are displayed. So if you come here to the settings again, you can see that in the general tab, you can select if you want to present the verse as an uppercase, and look here on the right hand side. You can select if you want to display only the reference for the verse instead of the verse itself. You might find that useful. If you had different versions, you could also display two versions at once. In here, in the verse description, you can change how the verse description, which is this top line here that shows which verse we are reading and the version of the Bible, is presented. So right now, it's going to be presented as the full name of the book and the address that we are reading using this column format. We can also change it to the abbreviated version of the book, and you can see that changing right there. And you can change also if you want the address being separated by a dot, or this column version. You can also change how it's going to be shown on the presentation. Right now it's using the darkened version, and if I change to the original, it will have the same brightness as the font that it's used in the theme. You can also change if you want them at the beginning of the verse, above the verse, at the end of the verse, and below the verse. So you can play with that if you want. I'm going to go back to the darkened one. And also in this show version tab, you can see that you can either show or not the version of the Bible that you are using. Right now there's only the address of this verse. And you can change if you want to show the full name of the version or the abbreviated name of the version. And if your version is pretty long, you can select if you want the full version in a single line. This SBB is related to the Brazilian version of the Bible, and also this red observation here. It's also supposed to be only useful for Brazilian users of Holyrics, so don't worry about that. One last thing that I didn't mention is this button right here, in which you can change how the verses are displayed for you. This is nothing related to how it's going to be presented. That's defined in the theme. But you can change how it's going to be shown for you right here. So you can change the size of this list and also the font. So if I press OK, you see that it changes only here. But as soon as I start the presentation, it presents in the same way as before. So this is for your personal use of Holyrics only. And also on this compare version button, unfortunately, since there's only one English version, there's nothing to compare, but I can illustrate how it works if I put a Portuguese version here. And now if I click this button, it will show me the same verse in up to 2 different versions that I have installed on my Holyrics, so I can compare them with this feature. And as soon as I select the version in here, notice that it changes whatever Bible version I have installed on Holyrics. So now I'm going to select this KJA. Suppose that I found that this version was the most appropriate to what the preacher was reading. So if I press OK, it now changed that, and then I can simply start presenting. So this is it. This is most of the features in the Bible section of Holyrics. As you can see, it's pretty powerful, and I hope you put it to good use on your church as well. So I'll see you on the next one. Bye bye.